In 1931, China experienced one of the deadliest natural disasters ever recorded, a catastrophic flood that changed the country forever. This was not a simple flood, but a massive deluge that submerged an area larger than England and half of Scotland combined. Millions of people were affected, entire cities were drowned for months, and the disaster unleashed waves of starvation, disease, and social collapse. While the world was distracted by the Great Depression and civil unrest, this tragedy unfolded largely in the shadows. Over the next 10 parts, we will explore 10 specific and horrifying facts about the 1931 China floods that reveal the scale and depth of this disaster's impact. Each fact tells a chilling story of human struggle and nature's overwhelming power. Get ready to discover the terrifying reality behind one of history's most devastating floods. Fact 1. The 1931 China floods destroyed 15% of the nation's wheat and rice crops. This fact reveals the massive agricultural devastation caused by the floods. In the year 1931, the Yangtze Valley, which was China's main farming region, lost about 15% of its entire wheat and rice crops to the floodwaters. This wasn't just a poor harvest, it was a catastrophic wipeout of food supplies essential for tens of millions of people. In some of the hardest hit areas, the destruction of crops was nearly total, leaving local communities without any food to harvest or sell. This caused prices for staple foods to soar, making it impossible for many families who survived the flood to afford basic necessities. The loss of these crops also destroyed the main source of income for millions, pushing many into deep debt and poverty. This fact highlights how the floods triggered an economic crisis that was as deadly as the water itself. Fact 2. The nationalist government's failure to maintain river dikes worsened the flood disaster. This fact exposes how political decisions deepened the catastrophe. In 1931, China's nationalist government was stretched thin, fighting a civil war against communist forces and facing threats from Japan. Because of these conflicts, crucial funds that should have been used to maintain and repair the river dikes protecting the Yangtze, Huai, and Yellow Rivers were often redirected to military expenses. This neglect left the dikes in a fragile state, unable to withstand the heavy rains and flooding that year. When the floodwaters rose, many dikes broke catastrophically, unleashing massive waves that devastated cities and farmland. The government's failure to invest in flood control and emergency preparedness contributed to the scale of the disaster and the high death toll. This political collapse also fueled public anger and increased support for the Communist Party, which criticized the nationalists for their incompetence during the crisis. This shows how poor governance directly worsened the impact of the 1931 floods. Fact 3. Wuhan was submerged for nearly 4 months during the 1931 floods. This fact focuses on the city of Wuhan, one of China's major industrial and transportation hubs, which was underwater for an astonishing length of time. In 1931, after the Yangtze River breached its banks, the city's 3 parts, Wuchang, Hankou, and Hanyang, experienced flooding that lasted for almost 4 months. In Hankou alone, water levels rose as high as 16 meters above normal, turning streets into canals filled with sewage, debris, and even floating carcasses. Residents were forced to navigate this submerged city using makeshift rafts and, in some reported cases, empty coffins repurposed as boats. Daily life came to a halt. With shops closed, factories underwater, and transportation crippled. This prolonged inundation created horrific living conditions, leading to widespread suffering and loss. This fact highlights how the floods didn't just cause brief chaos, but trapped entire cities in water for months, amplifying the disaster's human toll. Fact 4. The 1931 floods covered an area larger than England and half of Scotland combined. This fact reveals the staggering size of the floodwaters that swept across China. In 1931, the floods inundated roughly 180,000 square kilometers of land, an area bigger than England and half of Scotland put together. This immense flooding was not caused by a single river, but by the combined overflow of the Yangtze, Huai, and Yellow Rivers, all breaking their banks at once. The disaster was triggered by a perfect storm of environmental factors: a prolonged drought, a harsh winter that left heavy snowpack, followed by an exceptionally wet spring with intense rainfall and cyclones. This rare combination caused rivers to swell beyond anything previously recorded, creating a continuous wall of water that swallowed towns, farmland, and infrastructure across vast regions. This shows how the 1931 floods were not isolated incidents, but a countrywide catastrophe of unprecedented scale. Fact 5. Over 52 million people were affected, with 30 million left homeless. This fact highlights the enormous human impact of the 1931 floods. While early government estimates suggested about 25 million people were affected, modern historians now believe the true number was closer to 52 million. Of those, approximately 30 million were left homeless, forced to survive without shelter in desperate conditions. In some areas, nearly 61% of the local population became refugees overnight, losing everything to the rising waters. For example, in the city of Wuhan alone, nearly 800,000 people were displaced when the river dikes finally broke. Tens of thousands crowded onto a narrow railway embankment, a thin strip of dry land surrounded by endless floodwaters, with little access to food, clean water, or sanitation. This reveals the staggering scale of displacement and human suffering caused by the floods. Fact 6. At least 150,000 people drowned within the first few months. This scary fact reveals the brutal and immediate deadly force of the floodwaters themselves. In the first few months after the dikes broke in 1931, field surveys estimated that at least 150,000 people drowned. One of the deadliest moments came on August 25th, when a dike near Gaoyu Lake gave way, unleashing a torrent that drowned an estimated 18,000 people in a single night. In Wuhan, when a major dike collapsed, a massive wall of water swept through parts of the city, instantly drowning around 5,000 residents. Many buildings in the affected areas were only 1 story tall, offering little chance for escape from the sudden surge. Eyewitnesses described the terror of being trapped by a fast-moving wall of water that left no time to react. This emphasizes the swift, merciless destruction caused by the floodwaters before the long-term horrors of starvation and disease set in. Fact 7. The floods triggered deadly disease, outbreaks killing hundreds of thousands. This fact uncovers the hidden killer that followed the waters: disease. After the floodwaters receded, millions of displaced people lived in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions with little access to clean water. In 1932, a cholera epidemic alone claimed over 31,000 lives in the affected regions. The stagnant waters left behind created perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes, leading to a massive malaria outbreak that may have caused up to 300,000 deaths. Other diseases like dysentery and typhoid spread rapidly through refugee camps and flooded cities, overwhelming the limited medical resources. Disease became the deadliest threat for survivors who had escaped drowning, turning what should have been a time of recovery into ongoing tragedy. This shows that the flood's true death toll extended far beyond the initial disaster, with sickness ravaging communities long after the water dried. Fact 8. The floods caused widespread famine as crops were destroyed and planting was impossible. Fact 8 reveals how the 1931 floods devastated China's food supply beyond just the initial crop losses. The disaster destroyed the summer harvest and made it impossible for farmers to plant autumn crops, guaranteeing food shortages for months and even years to come. Survivors were forced into desperate measures, eating anything they could find, including tree bark, weeds, and even handfuls of earth, to survive. As remaining grain supplies dwindled, prices soared to levels unaffordable for most people. Millions faced starvation as the once fertile farmland was rendered useless by silt, debris, and water damage. This famine became a slow, grinding crisis that claimed countless lives and deepened the suffering caused by the floods. This fact shows that the 1931 disaster was not just about drowning, but about long-term destruction of the very land that fed millions. So, fact 9, social order broke down completely, leading to desperate acts of survival. This exposes the terrifying collapse of society in the wake of the 1931 floods. As starvation and disease spread, normal rules and morals broke down under the pressure of survival. There were documented cases where parents sold their children for money to buy food, and in some areas, wives were sold as well. The darkest and most desperate acts came when reports confirmed that some people resorted to cannibalism, eating the flesh of those who had died in the disaster. This breakdown of social order marked the deepest human tragedy beyond the physical destruction. The floodwaters didn't just drown homes and farmland, they drowned the fabric of community and trust. This shows how extreme hunger and desperation pushed people to unimaginable limits, during this catastrophe. Fact 10. The death toll of the 1931 China floods reached between 3.7 and 4 million people. This fact reveals the staggering and almost incomprehensible human cost of the disaster. While some Chinese historians estimated the death toll at over 422,000, most international sources agree the final number was far higher. Official reports at the time recorded around 2 million deaths from drowning and starvation, but more recent research estimates that between 3.7 and 4 million people lost their lives due to the combined effects of drowning, starvation, and disease. To put this into perspective, that is more than the entire population of some modern megacities today. Every one of these deaths was a human life, a person with a family, hopes, and a story, cut short by nature's overwhelming force. This fact confirms that the 1931 China floods stand as one of the deadliest natural disasters of the 20th century and one of the worst in recorded history. The 1931 China floods were a disaster on a scale that is hard to fully grasp, from the immediate drowning to the long-lasting effects of famine, disease, and social collapse. This event showed how nature can completely overwhelm human society. The stories of loss and survival remind us of the fragile balance we live in and the importance of learning from history. Understanding these facts helps us honor those affected and better prepare for future disasters.